Exciting to see everybody joining us. So welcome, good afternoon. Hope you're all well. We're really thrilled to have you join us this afternoon. And I think what we're going to do now, we've got 85 people in the room and more people coming. So let's say hello. So hello, good afternoon. I'm Matt Reed. I'm your moderator this afternoon. I'm part of the SPRINT Projects communication team. And so we're all delighted to have you here. And we're really thrilled that you've taken the time to join us. So what we're going to do this afternoon is talk you through how you can participate in this project and what we're about. We have people speaking from scientific background, policy backgrounds. We have a welcome from DG Agri. We have lots of exciting things happening, and also we have an opportunity for you to participate. So if we could just have the agenda up, please, that would be great. Okay. Here we go. Just coming up. So here's the agenda, just talking you through. So hello, I'm Matt Reed. I'm just going to speak for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Violette, who's going to introduce the project, who will then hand over to Gisela from DG Agri, who's going to say a few words. Then we'll move to an overview of 3 areas of investigation: impacts on human and environmental health from Paul Scheepers, global health risk assessment toolbox back to Violette, and then transition pathways towards reduced use and risk from Anna. Then we'll have a switch that will move into group discussions. Okay, there are 4 group discussions you'll be invited to go to: impacts on human health, impacts on environmental health, designing global health risk assessment toolbox, and a transition pathways. Then we'll come back together for one final time. We'll make some closing remarks. We'll repeat to you the offer of stakeholder engagement that we're talking about today and how you can be involved in SPRINT. And then we'll end and everybody can head off to a well-earned evening. So that's hopefully gives you an idea of where we're going and why we're starting to do this. So can I have the rules, please, Zuran? Okay, what we're suggesting to you is a few ground rules so all of this runs smoothly. Please keep your video and audio off during the plenary sessions. As I said, it just stops people being distracted. During the breakout sessions, please put your camera on, and when you want to talk, you can unmute yourself, and we'll be really delighted to hear you. On these virtual meetings, I don't have to say many health and safety things. You're in your office or you're in your home. I'm sure you will look after yourselves, but please, we ask you not to drive and Zoom. Okay, I know it sounds like a pretty reckless thing to do, but you can't take part in these things and drive a car simultaneously. Driving and Zooming is the road to doom. So please pull over or come back to us another time. These plenary sessions will be recorded. You can have a look at them then. Please use the chat functions for questions. And if you're asking us questions specifically of somebody who's contributing, pop their name in. Okay. And if you just want to chat, use the chat. Okay. We're going to make use of some polls, partly because we want to hear what you're thinking and what you're doing, partly because it's a nice way of communicating with each other. And so we are recording, just to say it again, the plenary sessions. The sessions which you break out, we will not be recording. So we are assuring your privacy of that. And obviously, you've been now duly warned. If you have any technical problems at all, there's a telephone number on the screen, or there is an email address. Please, technical crew are excellent, and they will be able to answer it. I am not alone here. I have an entire team from Ecologic who are facilitating this, as well as the whole of a SPRINT team helping making sure that all of this goes smoothly. Okay, so those are the ground rules, just ever so simple, just keep us ticking along. Okay, Zorin, let's quickly do this poll. We've got a quick poll coming up. It's going to appear in front of you, hopefully any moment now. This is going to be just a little bit of an icebreaker poll, a little bit philosophical. Please ping your thoughts into this. If you could travel in time, what would you want to see? The recent past, when your grandparents were young, the distant past, ancient Greece, Peru, China, you take your pick. The near future, your grandchildren's old age, the far future, once we have beaten climate change, or would you prefer to go sideways? Just have a bit more free time in the present. Please vote now. get some voting in, just so that we get used to using the tool, that we just get used to all interacting. So let's have a look. Hopefully we got a result for that poll just coming up now. Zoran, if you could just pop that up when you're ready.
Yeah, I wanted to give it 10 more seconds. It's
10 more seconds. So those
5 of 102 voted. I give it.
Oh, well, let's get that turnout higher. Come on, people, run to this poll. This isn't hard. You don't need a voting card. There's no voter ID. Just ping your thoughts into there, and let's see what we come up with. And thank you this afternoon. I can see we're up to 107 participants. That's fantastic. Thank you for giving us your time this afternoon and being motivated to take part. Okay, so here are the results. Oh, close win. So those last votes made the difference. Most people would like to go sideways to create a bit more time in the present, a little bit more leisure time. And then also we're interested in what the future would look like once we've been on climate change. So that's a really interesting result. And then in the past, the third is the distance past, what our ancient forebears societies would look like. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Hopefully that's just warmed us all up and got us used to the technology. So my job now is to hand over to Violette. Violette is the leader of this project and an inspiration to us all. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Violette.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark, for the fantastic introduction. I'm really happy to have you here all, because what we are thinking with our project, we would like to have you on board from the beginning on to think with you all how we can make the project to be implemented, or the results of our project to be implemented in policies, in European tools when it is over. That is the reason why we invite you now, after half-year project is running, or 9 months, to think with us, what is the way, where should we go, and to correct us, to give us ideas. So we would, together with you, like to have a think tank in the next 4 years to think, exchange ideas, and make the project really to something which we can use afterwards in the European Commission. So the SPRINT project is about sustainable plant protection transition and the development of a global health approach. Next slide, please. Why this project? The European Commission has launched this call 2 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, because we have an urgent questions. In Europe, actually, we have 2,000 pesticides approved on the market with 500 different substances. In recent studies, we found out that in soil, 83% of the European soils contain pesticide residues, 60% of them contain mixtures. And we found 166 different mixtures. But nobody knows what does this mean for ecosystem health. On the other way, the EFSA publishes yearly reports on pesticide residues in food. And it was published in last year that 44% of food contains pesticide residues below the maximum residue level, but 27% contains pesticide residues of mixtures with a maximum of 25 mixtures per food. The human health risk due to these mixtures is not known. So therefore, the European Commission, as well the EFSA, saw the urgency to make a project where we will look on these issues and find solutions. Next slide, please. So the SPRINT project aims to develop a global health risk assessment tool. That means, we will describe this a little bit later, a toolbox which will be designed for end users who would like to know what is the risk of mixtures on the environment and humans. In this toolbox, we will specifically as well address the issue of ecosystem risk and human risk. We will explain this in the following workshop in detail and as well in the following presentations. And these are more technical issues we would like to work on. But what we think is very important, we would like together with you to provide pathways for transition towards more sustainable plant protection, and as well to find solutions and transways in the view of the Green Deal published last year from the European Commission. Next slide. In our SPRINT projects, 28 partners participate from 14 European countries and Argentina. Argentina is included because there is a main feed production of soybeans for Europe. And across Europe, you can see here we have 11 case study sites where we will assess the real mixtures of pesticides which we can find, and we are actually in a field campaign simultaneously in all these 10 countries to see which residues do we find in the ecosystem, the aquatic and terrestrial ecosystem, but as well in animals and humans. Next slide. And then I come to the SPRINT toolbox I was talking about in the beginning. In this toolbox, we would like to make innovative fate, transport, and exposure models. I give you one example. We would like to include a component on atmospheric transport by dust from pesticides from the soil into the air and the dust. We would like to develop innovative risk assessment tools. That means eco tests, ecotoxicological tests, and as well toxicological tests, where we would like to assess the risk of, in this case, the hazard and risk of mixtures of pesticides, but as well to new endpoints to reflect the real risk in the environment. And based on these results on the both boxes, we would like to make risk maps for whole Europe to see what is the risk for environment and humans in different regions of Europe. And then we come to the next slide. We would like to invite you to have you all on board of the transition train, of the SPRINT transition train. We would like to include here people from governments, from the input supply chain, from production, from retailers, consumers, and I think in this train still assurances, banks are not still included. So please come with us to the transition train and don't jump up while we are working on this, because it's dangerous to leave a running train. I really would like to invite you all to contribute and to stay with us in the next years. Next slide. We will discuss the details of the different questions, and I think you all inscribed already to the different topics you are interested in the breakout rooms, which will be then after the plenary meeting. I will now ask Gisela Guaglia from the DG Agri to join us and to say some words. Thank you very much for joining us, Gisela.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all the participants and say a few words on behalf of the European Commission. Many thanks to the organizer for this invitation. Let me start with the policy context that we have currently at the Commission. The Farm to Fork strategy is part of the Green Deal and addresses the challenges of sustainable food systems with a new comprehensive approach. So it recognized the links between healthy people, healthy societies, and a healthy planet. So the strategy sets ambitious targets. One target that is particularly interesting for this event and for the SPRINT project is the one that aims to reduce the use and the risk of chemical pesticide by 50%, with particular focus on the most hazardous substance by 2030. These targets is echoed in the recently adopted Action Plan on Zero Pollution, on air, water, and soil, and included in the biodiversity strategy. So the European Commission has taken action towards this target with the planned revision of the Sustainable Use of Pesticide Directive. A second stakeholder consultation event will take place this very same week on Friday to discuss plan policy options with stakeholders. So this will be an online public event, which is free to anyone interested to attend. I will copy then the link in the chat. The Commission and DG Sante has launched a foresight study aiming to contribute to a robust policy trajectory on this topic and appropriate future vision scenarios on sustainable use of pesticides. So there will be a specific presentation on this study at Friday's stakeholder event. But the Green Deal targets need to be achieved by 2030. It means that we have 9 years, so 9 growing seasons speaking in agricultural terms. Therefore, it's time to step up our efforts. How can SPRINT contribute to this? The primary goals from the projects are very in line with the policy context and the needs, as Violet has just mentioned. SPRINT will be a key source of knowledge and solutions that will enable to and accelerate this transition, the transition needed to reduce the use and the risk of pesticides. So the discussion today among stakeholders is clearly very timely, and your contributions are very relevant. We, the Commission, are very much looking forward to the discussion and the outcomes of this event. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gisela. Thank you so much for that, putting that into a great policy context and also a fabulous sort of time frame for all of us to think about. 9 seasons puts it into quite a fantastic timetable for us. I'm conscious that people are still joining, so welcome. We are now going to move to the next section where we're going to set out some of the scientific and policy context for this. So I'd just like to welcome on our colleague, Paul. Over to you, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Welcome to this meeting. I'm honored to be speaking about the science aspects. My name is Paul Schepers. I work at the Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands. And my role is to coordinate the science in this project. Next slide, please. And I would like to briefly explain about the methodology. And maybe you have already understood that that we are going to use risk assessment strategy. That means that we are going to look at the magnitude of health and risks to both humans and the ecosystem and all species in that system. We're going to look at the impact of the chemicals, in this case, the pesticides, present in the environment. And let's say we're going to do this stepwise. So we start with identifying what's out there and then trying to find out about the risk. And then we're going to evaluate that risk and think about potential measures. And let's say that is, I think that we would like to involve you as stakeholders to discuss how we perceive that risk that we find. Next slide, please. And for that, we're going to tour around Europe to 10 different locations where we will study the exposure of in the environmental compartments, soil, water, and also we're going into the homes of residents in those locations. And we're going to look at the mixture of pesticides that we find, also including products of degradation. And we're going to look for those pesticides and degradation products in both humans and what we like to call non-target species. So that says those species in the ecosystem that should not be exposed to pesticides. And this, let's say, this field effort, field sampling effort is really meant to be a reality check, because at the moment most risk assessment is based on modeling of data that we have, but it's, I think, very useful to verify to what extent the mixtures that we assume to be there are really found in those crops and those environments. Next slide, please. And once we know the pesticide mixtures, we are going to study these mixtures, these particular mixtures from these 10 locations in a laboratory environment. And on the right side of the slide, you see a collage of pictures taken at laboratories of our partners who study the effect of pesticide mixtures on different plants and animals. And we are going to, instead of looking at single pesticides, we're going to look at mixtures, and we are going to assess the impact of those mixtures on the health of the different species. And that is, I think, a unique approach. And we're going to try to understand the mixture impact, and if we don't understand what the mixture does, you know, based on what we know of the composition of the mixture, then we will be alerted and look into how, let's say, components within that mixture may interact. This will all lead to a dose-response relationship that's shown on the right top picture. So we're going to relate the amount of that we test in the system and relate that to the response of the biological system of the organism. And from there, we are going to make predictions regarding the impact on human health, on the health of farm animals, and also on non-target species in the ecosystem. And I hope with that, I have briefly introduced, let's say, the strategy that we want to use in this project to assess the impact of use of pesticides in different farming systems. Thank you, Matt.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Just handing straight over now to Violette. And while we just do that, just to remind everybody, please do use the chat. I see that we've got questions appearing, pop those in. And if you're directing them to a particular speaker, please do that.
Okay, here I am again. I would like to present you now the toolbox. And Ecologic is so friendly to help me with these technical details. You have already seen this slide about the SPRINT toolbox, and I will now go a little bit more into detail because this prepares you for the workshops in the breakout rooms. Paul has already explained to you the innovative risk assessment tool, what we are going to do there. You see this in the middle. So I will go now a little bit into the innovative phage transport and exposure models. Next slide, please. What I have told you, or what you already have heard twice now, is that we are actually in the case study sites working on analyzing the mixtures of pesticides in the ecosystem, but as well in animals and humans. And in the same moment, we assess in the case study sites parameters on plant ecosystem health and as well on human health. What is very important that we include in our new concept, on the SPRINT concept, 3 main criteria for health. One is reproductivity, which is normally used by EFSA test as well. One is diseases, and the other one is resilience. Because I think we all have seen how important resilience now was in this COVID time. So what we did, we include resilience, and we have chosen to make an indicator for resilience like microbiome. And therefore we will use the soil microbiome to define how healthy is the soil, but as well we will look at the gut microbiome in our swarms in fish, but as well in humans and animals, to see, can we see a difference between the microbiome composition and an effect of pesticides on the microbiome composition and therefore on resilience. This is a completely new innovative approach where we are really happy with your people here on the stakeholder meeting who are expert in this, who would like to think with us on this approach. So, furthermore, what we would like to see is we have the models which are actually applied, which Paul already mentioned. These models have been developed many years ago and are as well always further developed to predict which pesticide concentrations we will find in the environment based on the application rates and decay and environmental conditions. But it has not been proven across Europe that these models predict in all cases the exact concentrations we will as well expect or we will really find. So what Paul says, we will compare the results of the case study sites with respect to pesticide applications and resulting concentrations in the environment and humans with models, and we try to innovate these models following and verify these models following the data we have found, but as well include new model components such as transport or atmospheric transport by dust as particulate transport. Next, please. Next. Next. For this, already Paul has shown you a little bit. We will, for the innovative risk assessment tools, we will go for new endpoints, and we will check as well the effect of these mixtures on conventional endpoints and on new endpoints. And as well, we will introduce innovative species into these tests. For example, actually the EFSA is using 1 or 2 earthworm species who do not live in the soil but live in compost normally. They're easily to handle in a laboratory, but what we would like to do is to use native earthworm species and look at the effects on these mixtures of pesticides on native earthworm species, but as well on their resilience, not only on mortality and reproductivity, but as well on resilience. And we will do similar things for similar ecosystem components and human health components. Next slide, please. What we are going to do then, we will have then at the end of the SPRINT project, hopefully a new toxicology test components and as well tests which we will suggest the EFSA to be ready for use. And as well we will have hopefully a data set, because we use the mixtures we will find now in the case study sites, and we'll test as well their ecotoxicology and toxicology. So hopefully we have data sets of the effects of mixtures on health, ecosystem, human and animal health. Next slide, please. Next slide. And this will allow us to develop risk maps for Europe. Next slide. You see here an example for the risks of mixtures for ecosystem or for human health. So we try to make maps and collect as well the existing epidemiological data, consumption data for people and so on, and combine all these different layers, including pesticide applications in the different cropping types and so on, to develop risk maps for Europe, and as well therefore give us well a base for the European Commission to see where are the regions of the most risks and where urgently action has to be done if we really want to have the farm to fork strategy implemented. Thanks for your attention, and I will now give the word to Anna from Ecologic, who will explain you something about our ideas to the transition train.
Okay, thank you very much, Violette. We've got some great questions coming in on the chat. I don't know if we could just address one of those. I think Paul's addressed some of them, but there's a question from Eugenia. PPP evaluation already takes 10 years on average and is frequently reviewed. when does this risk assessment take place? I think that's about the use of risk assessment in our project. I don't know if Paul or Violette could just give us a little answer there about how we're going to handle these timeframes. Go on, Violette.
Yes, thank you,
Or
Matt.
Paul.
I can, I think, provide an answer. So that's a very good question. So obviously our project only takes 5 years, and we have limited, let's say, a couple of years to do the testing. So we will be using short-term tests, like typically several weeks, up to 18 weeks. So that's the testing we can do ourselves. We have been thinking about how to involve potential long-term effects. We will set up systematic reviews to identify those studies, so-called for human health, that would be epidemiological studies, to identify relationships between pesticide exposures and health effects. And if we can find those response relationships, we will not, let's say, we will not use the experimental data, but we will use existing data from previous epidemiological studies to make the calculation, let's say, how exposure will impact health. I hope that it's a bit technical, but I hope that I've answered your question. If not, please let me know.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. And I really would emphasize to people that we're here to both answer your questions if we can this afternoon, but also record them so we can find out what's the most important and pressing questions. I see that people have already been making suggestions as to tools that are being used and under development in the chat, which is really, really helpful. So please do keep doing that. And as Gisela said at the beginning of this, we are working to a time frame. We have an urgency about this project, both in policy terms, but also in human health and environmental health terms, that there are lots of things that we need to get right in quite quick time orders. So let's, capture that sense of urgency and possibility. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Anna. Anna, I hope you're ready. I can't see you for the moment, but there we are. She's appeared in the sprint field. You may have noticed that many of us are in the same very large sprint field. So I'm going to hand over to Anna. All yours, Anna.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Anna Friedrich Larsen. I work with Ecologic Institute, and in the SPRINT project, I am coordinating the activities on transition pathways. I'll give a brief overview of the work that we're planning in this area, which very much relies on close collaboration with partners within the project, as well as stakeholders across the supply chain. Our work will involve 3 main steps. If I can move my screen. Yes. So the first step is really to develop a clear understanding of what exactly are the current and prevalent barriers in the different farming systems involved in the SPRINT project in terms of economics, regulation, risk assessment and authorization, sociocultural knowledge and R&D barriers, as well as the impacts from climate and biodiversity loss and how these hinder transition. And in the second step, we then aim to define what exactly do we mean by a more sustainable plant protection. So what's our endpoint that we're transitioning to? And how can we define this in really quite concrete terms? For example, by looking at the policy targets, Gisela mentioned farm to fork targets, but also about targets beyond the pesticide targets, so ecosystem, biodiversity and climate targets, because we think it's really important that we avoid narrow silo thinking and trade-offs between the targets, and that we define in concrete terms what kind of practices and activities and structures are going to get us to deliver on those combined targets. And for us, having an endpoint also means that we have to look at what different stakeholders' visions are about what sustainable plant protection means, looking at where there's agreement and where there's disagreement, and where the most societal acceptance lies. And we've started doing this by analyzing the farm to fork consultation submissions by different stakeholder groups. We also think that defining sustainable plant protection means that it's very helpful to analyze existing examples of successful transition. So that's one of the things that we'd really like to hear about from you today in the discussion group. The third step then is to actually propose transition pathways. So defining, actions and solutions that enable transition in different aspects of the supply chain, analyzing and mapping the successful examples and potential innovations, whether that be organizational, technological innovations, or scientific innovations and research needs. And this is with a view to developing concrete policy and regulation recommendations for the different farming systems that we look at in SPRINT, and really kind of moving towards feeding these recommendations both in the ongoing process during the project duration, wherever that's feasible, as well as into the policy framing after 2025. And why do we think that it's really important to bring together stakeholders across the different aspects of the supply chain? I'd like to illustrate this with an example relating to the crop diversification, which is one of the key measures to assist in this transition towards reduced pesticide use. This is adapted from a study, from a French study that looked at socio-technical barriers that hinder crop diversification in France, and it's adjusted a little bit to expand its scope. And what I'd like to point to here is that on the left side, you see the barriers across the different sort of carriages, SPRINT carriages, and the governance component around CAP's failure to better support crop rotation and diversification, to lack of public R&D on minor crops. And then just to explain what's meant here by minor crops, it's crops such as grain, legumes, linseed, hemp, so crops that are really grown to a much, much lesser extent than the major crops such as wheat, maize, rapeseed. So introducing these minor crops also requires new knowledge on these crops and how they behave and how to integrate them in existing rotations and so forth. On the input supply, the study identified, example, the absence of genetic progress on minor crops in terms of varieties and breeding, and also that there's actually few active ingredients approved on minor crops, whether that be chemical or biocontrols. In terms of the production at farm level and farming practices, there's a real need for learning about these new crops. There's lack of references in terms of what specific rotation in a specific location will give the best impact for farmers and in terms of economics, but also in terms of environmental benefits and reduced use of pesticides. Then in the collection storage, there's higher logistical costs for minor species. In the processing and distribution stage, there's higher transaction costs for these species, and there's absent standards that would specify the products. There's also on the consumption side a lacking outlet for farmers and a lacking stable outlet because there's lacking consumer demand for these minor crops. So all of this really, what this gives you a sense is that there's really a need for coordination also among these different, among addressing these different barriers. And I won't go through the detailed solutions here, but just to point out, and I'd like to discuss these with you on other examples with you in the discussion group, but just to point out really that we already know quite a lot of sort of high level general solutions, but what we're trying to do in SPRINT is to really break these down and develop transition pathways for the different farming systems in as concrete terms as possible, so as to really be able to feed into the policy process with the findings. And yeah, so as I meant, didn't mention earlier, but the farming systems that we will be looking at are dairy, wine, fruit, horticultural, and cereal production. And for these farming systems, we'll be identifying the barriers and the solutions, analyze successful examples for transition at farm level and at supply chain level, and then develop the pathways and the elements for the different pathways and the kinds of partnerships that we need so that we move along the transition. And we really believe that this can deliver some useful insights both into the ongoing policy processes and at the end of the project for framing from 2025 onwards. And with this, we'd really like to invite stakeholders along the supply chain. I think we have a very good turnout from the different stakeholder groups today already. We're very keen to exchange with stakeholders because we think that the research needs to be based in real life experiences, and especially in terms of identifying also sort of innovations and examples that are emerging, new examples and successful initiatives. This really depends on good exchange with stakeholders. We'd like to start that exchange with you today in the discussion group. Then we're planning individual interviews with stakeholders over the next half year, and then organizing 2 meetings per year from mid-2022 to 25. And we'll be giving you regular updates and share our knowledge and findings as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That's great. That's really helpful to everybody. I've just been encouraging people in the chat. I think Paul Sheeper's keyboard may be on fire because he's been busy answering questions. Can I just throw one to you, Anna, just for the moment? This comes from Berg 046, which I'm guessing is a pen name. What about reduction of livestock as an option to improve biodiversity? Is that the sort of thing that we'll be able to cover in our sort of thinking about transitions?
I think that what we'll be looking at is sort of more narrow and wider drivers. And I think the reduction in livestock numbers, it can be extremely effective, but because it reduces the pressure on intensification at farm and landscape level. I think that we will certainly be looking at schemes or examples of looking for examples of initiatives that have tried to do that, to be able to then reflect on what works and not. There's a lot of this is a very societally, a very sensitive, politically very sensitive issue. So, and also there hasn't been that much done on it, even though, for example, the Court of Auditors yesterday in its study and review of the CAP and its impact on climate mitigation, for example, pointed to this as being a significant gap in how the CAP is implemented. So it's certainly one of the issues, one of the drivers that we would be looking at.
Fabulous, thank you, because I think that also takes us back to perhaps our first question, which I think by memory came from Christy, who was just concerned that farmers weren't involved in this project. And I'm hoping that this discussion, Christy, has put your mind at rest, that we are actually involving all sorts and as many stakeholders as possible, and farmers and growers and land managers are very, very directly in our thoughts. Now, in the chat, you'll also see that Gisela has posted a link to a stakeholder consultation that's happening on Friday, which directly speaks to the future of pesticide use in the EU. So please do make use of that. Now, I'd like to thank colleagues who have been very, very promptly on time, which is great. And obviously the rehearsals made a big difference. So we're going to move now, hopefully, to the next phase of this afternoon. Okay, I'm hoping that out in somewhere in this cyberspace, Zoran has a couple of concluding slides. So here we go. Look at this. This is so just this proves you have been busy. Those of you who've been in other groups and didn't get to see, these are the Miro boards snapshotted some time ago, so we can show you all that you've all been really busy, and we've been collecting all of this evidence and all of this data. We are under pressure for time now, unfortunately, because I want to finish close to 5 o'clock, so you can all get, I was going to say, go home, as it were, aka turn off your computer and probably go to another part of your home. So that's just what we've captured. So just to reassure you, we've been listening, we've been capturing, we've been taking very close note of what you've been saying. So the next slide, please.
There we go. So my name's Paul Nathaniel from LQM. If we go to the next slide, so you get to your homes on time. I hope you really enjoyed listening to some of the exciting new work that we'll be carrying out over the next 4 years. As a result of coming to this event, you'll get an email summarizing the proceedings and then a separate email confirming your registration onto our stakeholder platform that will allow us to contact you in the future, and also gives you control so you can unsubscribe at any time, keeping in mind the requirements of GDPR. Stakeholders will be invited to 2 meetings a year on the topic they've expressed an interest in. And for those interested in the transition topic, then there's an interview at the start just to gather your thoughts and ideas. Violetta mentioned the think tank function to begin to gather thoughts and ideas that will help us shape both the interpretation and the communication of those results. And when you get these slides, if any of your colleagues would like to be a SPRINT stakeholder, please ask them to register at the URL in front of you. That's it. Make sure you've got your seat on the SPRINT Stakeholder Express secured, and back to Matt.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank everybody this afternoon for taking part. We've had a fantastic team effort to make all of this happen, and I hope that you've felt welcomed and felt that you've been listened to and you've been able to participate as you would hope. It's very clear, I think, from everything that people have said today, this afternoon, that this is a really timely and important project. We have a time frame that Gisela set out of only a limited number of harvest seasons left where this important work has to be done. I really, really value the contributions that everybody has made in the chat. I was popping between the working groups and listening to what you were discussing, and it was some fantastic discussions. We are going, as I said, we've captured all of the plenary sessions. We will be sharing this information with you. You have an opportunity to stay with us in Sprint, to use our favored metaphor, to stay on the Sprint train and keep with us to the destination and see the difference that your involvement in this can make. So thank you very much to everybody. We are just now coming up to 5 o'clock. So please, make a safe journey if you're driving home. Look after yourselves in this difficult time. You are many, many ways you can connect with us on an almost daily basis. If you're on social media, please grab us on Twitter. There is a website, there is a newsletter. There are lots of ways that you can stay with us. So thank you so much for everybody for taking part today. And it's been really, really helpful, your contributions thus far. So thanks again. We're going to stop in a moment. You can see in the chat that there are kind of all sorts of still options going on. So there's still a survey here if people want to take it and let us feedback. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. The screens will go blank in a bit. So thanks once again.